Well, happy Monday morning. Every year, the results of our Barbados Secondary School entrance exam is eagerly awaited. And as we receive the results today, I hope that we will keep in mind that this exam is only one step in a child's lifelong journey of learning. This year, the exam was returned to its original May administration period, and as is customary, it was administered at the 21 public secondary schools. Students from 68 public primary schools and 26 private primary schools were registered to write the examination. In 2024, 252 students less than in 2023 took the Barbados Secondary School examination. I commend all of those who wrote the examination this year for their dedication and for their hard work. As compared to last year, 2023, our ministry received 138 requests for special assistance during the exam, and that compares to 180 in 2023. And we are certainly happy to see the decrease in the number of special requests for special support during the examination, and we will continue to cater to students' needs throughout the academic year, even in primary, as they make their way towards the Barbados Secondary School entrance exam of 2025. We recognize that by increasing the frequency and the availability of appropriate testing for our students, and by continuing the diagnostic testing of students for hearing and sight, which we did over the last couple years, that this is an attempt for us to identify and to provide early intervention for these students. And we are happy to see that so many have benefited, that it has reduced the need, at least this year, for us to have to provide special assistance. In addition, we recognize that even after many of these students who received special assistance, as well as those who needed none and have done so well this year, even after they get to secondary school, they're going to need the teachers, the principals, to remain vigilant to ensure that they do not fall further behind. And as soon as this summer starts, the Ministry of Education will continue to offer free of cost our summer school program. And this program will provide additional support for several identified students, primarily in Class 4, who have shown deficiencies in certain basic numeracy and literacy skills. And additionally, during the next academic year, school leaders of the respective schools, that's the principals and the year heads and the heads of departments, will be expected to develop programs that will accelerate learning in all of the students in their schools and classes. And this effort, I must say, it builds on meetings which were held since last year, July, ahead of the 2023 start of the school year. Meetings held by the Chief Education Officer with principals of primary and secondary schools to discuss the consistent use of school improvement plans as part of their responsibility as the instructional leaders of the schools. And what that means is that, in keeping with the intention for education transformation, we want our principals to really double down on meeting regularly with their management teams to effectively plan instruction and to assess the skills and the competencies of their students so that plans and programs can be designed with those students' needs in mind. It cannot just be a case of continuing and what a child gets from the regular programs, but it has to be that we are paying attention, that we are vigilant, and that we are being intentional in how we design instruction to suit their needs. For the gifted students who move at a faster pace than most other students, we granted permission this year in the Barbados Secondary Schools entrance exam to 12 students who wrote the exam at an earlier age. And I have to say that all 12 of those students performed well. And so I wish to thank the principals and the teachers, the parents, the guardians, and even the non-teaching staff for working hand in hand with the officers of our Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training to achieve the objective of creating a brighter future for our children. And now to the results. When compared to the past 2 years, there has been an increase in the number of students who were allocated to public secondary schools. Of the students who took the examination this year, 96.1% were allocated to public secondary schools as compared to 95.4% in 2023. Mathematics scores ranged from 0 to 100. 9 students scored 100 marks in 2024, and that is compared to 35 students in 2023 and 2 students in 2022. This year, 5 students scored 0 as compared to 4 last year. The national mean for mathematics was 54.62 as compared to 59.2 last year. And these statistics indicate that the statistics overall indicate that there was no significant difference in the performance of students between 2023 to 2024. Our ministry will continue to do analysis on what were the specific areas where the students had the greatest challenges so that we can be targeted in how we seek to intervene and improve the quality of instruction and the way in which we address their particular needs in those isolated areas. So it's not just having the overall scores, but it is also understanding the specific areas within each exam that created the greatest challenges so that we can do the necessary work. In English, scores ranged, again, from 0 to 100. And this year, well, I should say from 0 to 98, because this year no student scored 100 marks in English as compared to 1 student last year. 1 student also scored 0 in English as compared to 2 students last year. The national mean in English for 2024 was 65.2 as compared to 69.5 in 2023. The statistics, they indicate that there was not a major significant difference in the performance of students between 2023-2024. When it comes to individual performances, the top female student scored 99 in mathematics and 96 in English with an overall converted score of 246.81 with an A in composition. And that female student is Ariana Bascom. Additionally, the top male student also scored 99 in mathematics and 96, just as the female, in English. So their scores were identical for both male and female top performers, bringing him to 246.81 with an A. And his name is Finn Graham. To both of these students, the top female and the top male student, I congratulate you, just as I congratulate also all those who made their best effort in the exam of this year. I want to say that on in-depth analysis by our team, led by Mr. Price, the performance of students in mathematics and English, that performance demonstrates the important need for us to look at how we teach the basics and how children relate to what they are learning. And in seeking to transform our education system to one that is fair, to one that is inclusive, to one that is relevant and modern, we must consider how best to optimize the potential of each of our students. When we reviewed the performance of our children over the past 10 years, we remain concerned as a ministry, and we should be concerned as a nation, that we simply cannot continue to be satisfied with an average of 22% of our students scoring below 50% in the English examination, and an average of 46% of our students scoring below 50% in our mathematics examination. And that is when we do the analysis over the last 10 years. We are therefore, as a ministry, on a mission to develop standards that will enable every school to rise to become a good school in the teaching of mathematics, in the teaching of English, and of all the other core subjects as well as the additional subjects. Every school must rise to become a good school. And that means that our emphasis must be on standards. Not so much an exam, but on standards. So that when a child passes one level and moves on to the next, we know that that child has met the necessary standard to move on. We need to do so to ensure that we have enhanced the overall student learning and achievement across our national education system. And so we are proposing to have a national standards across our education system that will be transparent for all to see what are the standards each child needs to have achieved to pass each level on their journey through our education system. We must also ensure that we strengthen the standards and the practice for our teachers to improve the quality of instruction and to improve their professional development so that they can stay on the cutting edge of what it will take to move our children through this system. We need to enhance the overall physical infrastructure of the school because we know that not all schools have access to the same facilities. And even when they have access to facilities, not all facilities are maintained at a level that they ought to be. So that has to be at the forefront, not only the physical infrastructure, but the digital infrastructure of the school. In addition, we will have to strengthen and institutionalized profiles and the operational functioning of this ministry. This ministry, as it is currently structured and peopled, needs to build its capacity and its competencies in several areas to be able to administer and have oversight for a modern education system. And so the work that we have to do is not just at the school level, it has to be at the ministry level. And the capacity building is not just for institutions, it has to be for people, whether it's the teachers, the school leaders, the education officers, as well as the general administrators of education across our system. And we also need to strengthen our regulatory framework and the environment that governs the wider educational sector. And I say all that against the background of these results, because I think if we've listened to what the numbers are telling us, when we listen to what the teachers are telling us, when we listen to what the principals are telling us, we have to do things differently in order to ensure that every child has a fighting chance at a bright future within our system. And I want to share with you that work has already begun in these areas. For example, we have already begun the implementation of the transformation in curriculum, coding and robotics, the civics curriculum, and there's been a pilot for digital literacy. Additionally, curriculum review in subjects such as mathematics and English and science and civics at the primary level, that is scheduled to commence in August of this year. And at the secondary level, heavy emphasis will be placed on continuing coding and robotics, animation, digital literacy, and gaming, helping to prepare our children for the future of work in this world. But we recognize it's not just about the academic subjects. There is need for our children to acquire better understanding and knowledge. Attitudes must be improved. Skills must be improved. And their ability to get along with each other at the social and emotional level and the interpersonal relationship level, all of these must be part of what we do. So it's not just about what you will learn in the books, but it is also how you will be able to govern yourself within a school environment so that all can benefit from what is there. Also in September this year, we established a school of excellence in early childhood care and development. And this school will become the hub for best practices in pre-primary education and will provide a cutting-edge environment where students can play and they can learn and they can grow at that early stage between age 3 to 5. The findings and examples that have come from this School of Excellence so far, as we have studied, we've observed, and we've been documenting, the findings will certainly help us to ensure that our children across the island are better prepared for primary education because we have built a more solid foundation earlier in their educational journey. We have continued to work with Urdeston Teachers Training College for the delivery of continuous professional development for our teachers and our educational leaders. You would have heard that as recently we have built partnerships with Columbia University and other universities and partners locally, regionally, and internationally to make sure that we build the capacity of Urdeston Teachers Training College to be able to deliver more at better quality without necessarily having to develop all the capacities themselves, but where they can partner with others to augment their capacity to deliver to all. The infrastructure of schools, you would have heard us and you would have seen in the public that we asked the architects of Barbados to help us to reimagine what schools would look like at the primary, the secondary, the special needs, and at the nursery level. And we asked them to send those concepts in based on particular briefs for what we want for a 21st century school. I am happy to tell you that the competition has closed, the evaluation has closed, and we expect within the next couple of weeks to announce the winners and to show those images to Barbados so that we know that going forward, these are some of the models on which we will seek to improve the infrastructure of our schools in Barbados. There is so much more that we can share about what else has been going on at this ministry. Many have said we have been quiet about what is happening with transformation. There is one last piece of the puzzle that we are working on fine-tuning, and we expect that once that is fine-tuned and government passes, that we'll be able to come back to you with some very encouraging and some very innovative and exciting ways in which we want to transform this system with all partners on deck. And so I close asking that you will continue to work with us to help to build a bright future for every child. No doubt you may have specific questions with regards to either the examinations or other things, and we invite you at this stage to pose your questions. To my right is the Chief Education Officer, Dr. Ramona Archer-Bradshaw. To my left is the acting Deputy Chief Education Officer, Mr. Price, who really and truly has his hands in the middle of all things exams. So he really is the man on the spot for the questions. And then to my far right is Ms. Wendy Odell, who is our permanent secretary here in the ministry. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hello, morning. I'm Carlos Atwell from the Nation newspaper. I'm hoping if you can give an update with the schools that had some issues recently. St. Giles, I think there's one with mosquitoes as well. St. Giles Secondary, and I mean, there's another school as well. Where's Hall?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Atwell. Quite recently, we have received information about those schools with regard to the issues being experienced by staff and in some cases principals at those schools. Let us first deal with St. Giles Primary School. It came to our attention about 2 weeks ago that a number of teachers remained at home. They said that they were not feeling well. Mr. Price, the Deputy Chief Education Officer with responsibility for schools, subsequently held a meeting with the teachers to try to get to the bottom of the matter. He had a meeting as recently as last week, Thursday, Mr. Price? As recently? Last week, Friday, where the teachers were able to raise their concerns. I'm going to allow Mr. Price to speak a bit more about that. As soon as he's finished, I will speak a bit more about the St. George Secondary School, and Minister will speak about Wesley Hall.
Yes, please. Thank you. As the chief identified just now, the ministry was notified of some issues at St. Giles Primary School, I think, like about 2 weeks ago. And I was contacted by the president of BUT, Barbados, Barbados Union of Teachers, sorry, right? And we agreed that a meeting was due where both parties would get the opportunity to put their grievances on the table, so to speak. So I met with the teachers at St. Giles last week, Friday afternoon. It was a long meeting, I must say, but it was also fruitful and productive. The teachers were able to voice their concerns, many of which I will not necessarily discuss with you now. But I must say also that we have made arrangement, we now in terms of the Principals Association, the Teachers Union, and the Ministry of Education, that we will convene a meeting with the principal, because at that meeting on Friday, the principal did not take part in the discussion, right? So at present, I'm yet to hear the principal side of what happened and what transpired and some of the issues at St. Giles, right? So that is where we are with St. Giles. That meeting is due for probably either Wednesday or Thursday this week with the 3 parties. And then the Chief Education Officer then will get back to you with further details in terms of the way forward for both St. Giles, and then she will take part in Wesley Hall. Is Wesley Hall? She will deal with Wesley Hall.
All right. Minister, you want to speak about Wesley Hall?
On the question of Wesley Hall, I am told that even today, again, the teachers are not well and therefore are not there. And that's unfortunate because we don't want for them to be unwell and at school. At the same time, we have to balance that against the fact that every day that there is no school for various reasons, that in fact the children are the ones who suffer most. I want to say that last week, Monday, for example, which I believe is the earliest incident to which you are referring, sir. And thanks for shaking your head to in acknowledgement. I want to say to you that on the 13th of June, which was the Thursday, our permanent secretary met with members of the unions. I believe they were all unions, or the significant, all major unions who
BUT separately.
and BUT separately as well. At that meeting on Thursday, June 13th, a number of issues were raised. On June the 14th, which was the day after that meeting, at 9:28 p.m., at 9:28 in the night, a letter then came from the said Barbados Union of Teachers that indicated matters that were not raised within the last 24, 48 hours when the PS had the meeting on Thursday. The letter came from the principal, I should say, of the Wesley Hall Primary School. So there's a meeting on the 13th. Certain matters are raised and action items were developed for them. The next day, in the night, at 9:28, a letter comes in to the PS indicating issues that were not raised before. And by Monday morning, teachers were feeling ill and were not able to come to school. It is reasonable, where matters are raised, that we give those who have to follow up adequate time to be able to respond appropriately. And it is unfortunate that the report that finally came to our permanent secretary at 9:28 on June the 14th, from our information, that's the information passed to me, that report had been sent by the safety committee to the principal since March. And all the specific items were not raised with the PS in the June 13th meeting, the day before the letter came. And so when we look at this kind of timeline and we look at the issues raised, it really should cause us to wonder. And in the morning of June, I believe it the 17th, when teachers were ill, and the acting deputy chief education officer, Mr. Price, contacted the principal and the union, they all indicated that they had no idea what was going on. They were not aware. And when you have a situation where 5 out of 32 teachers, I believe, those are the correct numbers, Chief, turn up, and the unions in that environment say, but I was not aware, it makes us wonder. It makes us wonder when one day you meet with the ministry, the next day in the dead of the night you send a letter, and then by the next working day, teachers are off, but you don't know. And I imagine it is possible that you don't know everything going on in the school environment. But I want to say that I hope that we will all be able to move forward in good faith. In good faith. And to do so in a manner that will mitigate impact on the children of this country. And those are the facts of the situation for Wesley Hall. What I will say is we will continue to work with the entire education community at Wesley Hall Primary to ensure that we are able to discharge our responsibility in addressing those areas that we own, and we encourage our other partners to own their part in this experience of lost education for our children. Thank you.
With regard to St. George Secondary, on a different note, I wish to thank the staff and the principal, along with the students at the school, for working with the Ministry of Education. On Wednesday last week, I was made aware of the worsening mosquito situation. The principal and the Board of Management had done all that was possible to ensure that the environment of the school was clean. However, the mosquito situation got much worse, and a request was made to have the school closed because it was affecting the students and the staff. And because the Ministry of Education wants to make sure that our teachers, non-teaching staff, and students are in an environment that is safe and secure, the decision was made to close the school until further notice. In the meantime, investigations were done by the Ministry of Health and Wellness and the Ministry of Housing, and it was discovered that there were 2 large sewage tanks in the constant housing area. And those 2 large tanks malfunctioned, and there was stagnant water where the mosquitoes were reproducing at a very rapid rate. The Ministry of Education will continue to collaborate with the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Housing to determine when it will be safe for our students and staff to return.
Good morning, panel. The name is Ryan Jilts from Barbados today. Just 2 things. The schools for the top students, Ariana and Finn, you didn't mention which schools they attend currently. Just wanted to know if you had that information that you could share with us. But Minister, I'm going back to when we did the tour, I think it was Lawrence T. Gay, when they had their set of issues in terms of the plant and whatnot. I remember that you had called for a more harmonious working relationship between the unions and the ministry. For the layman, based on what you're saying, that is not happening. I guess the question many people would want to know is what can be done about that, because if we're looking to do everything we can in the interest of our children, somebody's got to give somewhere. Your thoughts?
Thank you so much. You are so astute in your thoughts. And I really want to say to you that the tremendous effort that has been made, whether it has been the collaboration which I mediated last week with Gaia and the Barbados Union of Teachers as it relates to what's happening at St. Bartholomew's, whether it has been the work that has been done by Minister Jordan, Minister Abrams, and myself in relation to mitigating the problems at Ann Hill with the construction of the new NIS-funded building directly opposite, where we were able, through a process of conversation and then coming to an agreement on what needed to be done, setting timelines, and then having regular follow-ups to make sure that everyone is doing what they need to do. I think that we have started out in a good way in that area. And so what I see us needing to do is to have that ongoing conversation and not just waiting for crises to happen, but being able to be proactive. That's one thing. I think additionally from the ministry is what the permanent secretary has now started to do. The permanent secretary joined us just over about a year ago. And she has been catching up with what is happening in the ministry. She has now instituted, under my instruction, a quarterly meeting with unions, with there being no limit on what other meetings might need to happen in between. So the quarterly meetings are the stand-in meetings. But in the event that there needs to be something else worked out in between, the permanent secretary has made herself accessible. And so I think part of it is making sure that the ministry is more accessible to the unions and making sure that we put some protocols in place as to how we can best work with each other. And we have some success stories on which we can build. I think the ministry needs also to ensure that when complaints come into it through various means, because sometimes the concerns will be raised through our educational technical management unit, which does repairs for schools. Sometimes it comes in through an education officer. Sometimes it's called in various places. What people have to understand is the first stop needs to be the Deputy Chief Education Officer with responsibility for schools must have clear information so that he, in this case, or she, can then make sure that the necessary arms across government are across, and as you say, government, because remember, in some situations, like the St. George situation, the Ministry of Health had to get involved. In other situations, the environmental department or the Ministry of the Environment may have to get involved. Once that report gets to the correct level, then we are best able, and we as a senior management team have had this discussion, that there needs to be an effective and timely response to those complaints. When those things have been brought to our attention in the appropriate way, we have certainly been able to respond. So while the ministry must do its own part in terms of access, information sharing, and timely response, and making sure that we have the right interventions at the right time, the partners also must own their part of making sure that this relationship goes well. And we at the ministry choose to believe that all of our partners want to act in good faith. We choose to believe that. And so when we see those examples that could make us wonder about good faith interaction, then we need to continue that dialogue. And I think let us not pretend, sir, that the Ministry of Education has always had a perfect relationship with the unions. This is before me, this is before many of us here at this table. And we have to be realistic. Relations that were not good for a number of years will not suddenly become good in one day, but you can see the ministry actively seeking to do our part to make sure that we advance relationships in a way that makes sense. We value our relationship with our entire school community, including our unions, our teachers, our principals, as well as our non-teaching auxiliary staff and others. And so we are actively seeking to find ways to build bridges. The permanent secretary, Wendy Oldell, is of that mind. The chief education officer is of that mind. The minister, of course, is of that mind and has actively been involved in seeking to resolve some of these issues even from behind the scenes. And so, sir, it's a combination of all parties involved must engage with good faith and be prepared to hold each other's hands, if not for their own good, has to be fundamentally for the betterment of the children of this country. The question that you asked about the schools from which the top girl and boy came, Ms. Ariana Bascom, she is at Providence, and Mr. Finn Grain is from St. Winifred's.
CBC News. I don't want to belabor the point on the schools, but just for clarification, the teachers at St. Giles are back out today?
As far as I'm
Go
As far
ahead.
as I'm aware.
As far as we're aware,
As far
yes.
as we are aware, yes.
Okay. St. George Secondary, I am assuming that they are working online until the issues are resolved.
Yes, some teachers will be having classes online, but you must be aware that examinations are finished. So many of our teachers are at this time entering marks into the report, putting comments and so on. But where necessary, classes will be held online.
And at Wesley Hall, can we also get an update on the remedial work that was supposed to take place over the weekend? If that has been resolved, and given that the teachers are not at school today, if, like was done in the past, where the other teachers come and step in to ensure that the children are taken care of, or is it a matter of parents and guardians are collecting their young charges?
I'm not too sure in terms of what work was done at Wesley Hall over the weekend. I know that ETMU had promised that they would start a phased approach to the remedial work from Friday, right, and over the weekend. But I have not heard from that department in terms of whether or not any work has started, right? So I'm not too sure of the status right now.
Okay, but what we will do is immediately after this meeting, we will have an update in terms of what was done over the weekend, and we would provide that information.
No problem. Going back a little bit, coming away from the schools a little bit, but going back to what you were talking about, enhancing the education system and what's not. Recently I was talking to a teacher at a secondary school, and he said one of his concerns is that there are not enough males in the school system, and so there's no role models for the young boys. And given that Barbados tends to have a lot more single parents households, and you have the setup with the mother, the grandmother, more aunts in a household, then boys don't get the opportunity to have males to pattern themselves behind. Based on everything that the minister said, then is this a call for more men to get into the teaching profession so that, you know, we could have the balance across the school system? Because even last week, I believe it was, Mr. Sargent made a similar comment, and realistically speaking, it is a cause of concern.
First of all, I thank you for saying that, because from the time, the chief will tell you, from the time I came here, I have been calling, please, any males who are out there, who are qualified, who are committed to the growth of our young people, who want to help us as leaders in our classroom, and who are qualified in teaching and learning, please come forward. You know, Mr. Price was just telling me that we just did interviews at Erdiston for the DPED program. That's the Diploma in Education. And out of 27 interviewed, there was only one male. And this is not different from what it has been traditionally. I'm also told by the education officers here that we have often had lesser males within the school system as teachers than we would like, and even as guidance counselors as well. And so this is certainly a call to all of those male teachers who really are committed to the growth and development of young people and who are competent and qualified to please come forward and let us see how best we can integrate more males in our system so that we are also able to provide the level of support that some males need from within our system, male students in particular.
And I am hoping that you would have seen the concerns about the days being dubbed Gender Day at Dighton Griffith Secondary. I know there's a statement from Major Boyce, but for clarification as well, a lot of parents were concerned about the title gender and in 2024. So I'm hoping that you could provide some clarity on that, please.
I'm going to ask the chief to respond to that, because this morning, as I got sight of it, I said, Chief, what is this? And Chief then proceeded to speak with the principal of the school to understand what indeed was intended. And the chief was able to get a response which she shared with me. And rather than pass it on secondhand, I'm going to ask her to speak to it, because she did get to the bottom of what that is.
Thank you for the question. Yes, Minister is correct. I did speak with the principal concerning that matter, and he indicated to me that the Gender Day is an extension of gender prayers. Usually in secondary schools, we have gender prayers where all of the boys will come together and have prayers, and all of the girls will come together and have prayers also. This day is a day in which the students, the boys separately and the girls separately, will be engaged in a number of activities to help with confidence building, character building. They will learn about the world of work. They will learn about deportment, all of those things that are necessary to turn into wholesome individuals. So I saw the messages on social media and the concerns being raised by this thing called Gender Day, but I just want to allay the fears of the public. Gender just means, you know, you're having all boys together, doing activities together, and all girls together doing activities together. So please understand that.
And finally from me, I know we're supposed to be reforming the education system and going to schools of excellence. One of the concerns from parents, at least what we've been hearing on the ground, is when will this happen? So that, because, well, in essence, because you still have kids who are not some who are not academically inclined, some who are more gifted, and unfortunately in a classroom setting, everybody moves at the same pace, essentially. But then there are those who get left behind, not because you want to, but because it's a little bit more difficult to not separate them and deal with them individually. But there are a lot of gifted students in Barbados who may not be great with maths and English, but who might be gifted in the more technical subjects. Is there any progress on that in terms of kind of, separating them so that if I like math and English, I can focus on that side, and if Ryan likes technical subjects, woodwork and metalwork and that kind of thing, to focus more on that side. Almost like how, how St. Leonard's and St. George, they tend to have that great mixture.
Okay.
I'm going to give the overall approach that we will take, and I'm going to let the pedagogues deal with the pedagogy, how you go about teaching children in the classrooms. Barbados' position is that every child should have the opportunity to learn the way they learn, because children learn differently, and to have equal opportunity to achieve their full potential. And as you know, some children are very good at using their hands and doing things in that way. That's how they learn. They tend to be more kinesthetic. They have to get involved, and they can pick something down and put it back up, and that's the way that they are. Very good technically with their hands. There are some who are excellent at book learning, and they can go and they can study, and they've got the theory, and it is just the way that they want it. What we are seeking to do through education transformation is not just develop children who have the book learning and can understand what it is they need to do, but who can actually apply it and do something with what they know. So it's not just what you know, it is how can you apply what you know. And part of the approach that we use in that is technical and vocational. That is where the competency base, when you are looking at what is this person competent to do with what they know, and how are they able to demonstrate that, it is then the way in which we will assess them that will determine that. One of the things you will hear is that we're seeking to raise the profile of technical and vocational learning to the same standard as that of the academic learning. Because for too long, we have said that technical and vocational is for those who can't do the academics. And that is not true. Because when we look across Barbados at some of the people who are doing amazing things in business usually, and in other areas of the trades, they are from all across Barbados. When we were speaking with Samuel Jackman Prescott Institute of Technology, and they give you the profile of some of the students coming in there, and you speak to the Barbados Community College, and you look at the profile of the students coming in, there are from all schools in Barbados who learn in different ways and have just found that this is their love. So I would say overall, one, we want an inclusive approach to education, where we have the ability, teachers have the ability to effectively manage classrooms with students who have mixed ability, which means they, the teachers, need to be trained in how to differentiate instruction within the same classroom. And there are effective techniques that are being used around the world successfully that takes us away from, and I'm going to say it, from putting those children over there, because in Bajan terms, which is not quite true, they're dunksy. That's not the truth. That's not the truth. It is that children learn differently, and we have to understand how they learn and be able to tailor our instruction to be able to reach them more effectively. Every single child can learn. We just need to learn and help our teachers understand how do you reach every single child in your classroom. And so the policy that we're pursuing is one of mixed ability classrooms with differentiated learning to the extent possible, making sure that teachers are properly trained to identify the specific needs of students, and whether they're gifted or they need remediation or they're challenged, they're then able to design plans and programs that will allow that child to excel.
Hi, Ryan Jones again. Not wanting to take away from the great work that Ariana and Finn have done. In terms of the other students, I know normally we would have done in the past, I think the top 5, top 10. Could you give us an idea of how the others performed behind them in terms of who might have come in closer behind the 246.81A, maybe a 240.1B or whatever the case may be?
All right, I will answer your question. So we have Zamara Doughton from the Rock Christian Primary, 246.61A. We have Chanel Lewis from Good Shepherd, 245.53A. Will that do?
In terms of the points?
In terms of the boys, we have we mostly have females here in the top 5. All right. There is a Jayesh Whitehead from Bridgetown Seventh-day Adventist, and he scored 244.59A.
Usually, in terms of the allocation of the marks, there's an accompanying school. Would we know by now which school these students will be looking to head off to?
All right, I can see where these questions are going. And you realize that this press briefing was a little different this year because for us, it is about highlighting all students, commending them for their performance in the Barbados Secondary Schools entrance examination. We know that they have worked hard during the entire year. We wanted to highlight the fact also that the Ministry of Education is committed to providing an environment at every school that will conduce to their learning and development. And this is the reason that we did not highlight particular schools this year. Okay? So I thank you very much for your questions.